Today is Halloween. I thought it was only appropriate that I turn my attention to something a little bit spooky and a little bit different. And so today I'm going to be taking a look at the Mego Universal Monsters line. I'm sure I don't need to tell anyone just how important, how influential, and how enduring these films have been. Most of them are fast approaching their centenary, and that is really quite an achievement to think that they are just as watched today as they were all those years ago, and still very impressive. And so, being both a big fan of these films, but also, of course, of Mego, I'm delighted to have a range of figures that is dedicated to them. And I have to say, in my own personal opinion, I do think that Mego really pushed the boat out with this line of figures, and I think they've produced a pretty special line. We'll start off by looking at the Lugosi Dracula. The card art in the background is a little bit cartoony, nothing too special, but it is nice that we actually have an image of Lugosi up front and centre there, and of course, we see a bit more artwork on the reverse of the packaging. And although this isn't a screenshot of the castle in the background, it is obviously just a painting, it's a very nice touch and it definitely evokes that atmosphere. But one of the things I really do like about the packaging is that when you take the figure out, behind it, we can see this coffin there. So I think this is a cool little extra touch, and yeah, it's very effective and fun. And getting the figure out of the packaging here, we can see that straight away this is a cut above what you'd expect from a Mego figure really. There's something a little bit extra with the tailoring. He's got obviously a lot of different textures going on. That coat there is obviously more of a velvet kind of material. And I think the sculpting is absolutely fantastic. So if we compare it with an image from the actual film, it's not perfect. But then again, for Mego, I think this is a really strong head sculpt. I think they've done a really nice job with the paint taps, the little darkness under the eyes and on the lips and whatnot. I think they've done a really good job of this. I really love this velvet cape or this velvet effect, and it's even better because on the inside it is lined with that red sort of satin feel. Again, it's not satin of course, but it has that feel, and it is that shiny material there, which looks really, really good. And again, I think the tailoring on this is pretty nicely done. Even on the lapels there's a little bit of extra detailing, obviously his little waistcoat, the buttons, and of course the dicky bow there. I think this is all absolutely fantastic. Now, a little point to point out, obviously, is that you can see a little bit of a red stain on mine. That is where it's come from the lining of the cape and is rubbed off onto his waistcoat. The same thing can be seen on his hands, which by the way I think is a really cool sculpt, that sort of reaching hands there, the far apart fingers I think looks really good. So yeah, something to be aware of. I think when it's red and when it's Dracula it doesn't matter because it could easily be blood. And again, the tailoring is very nicely done. We can see those sort of tails there on the back of his jacket, and of course the piping down the side of his pants, a little bit of extra cotton there, and it just sets it off, just gives it a little bit extra to the figure, which I think is really nice. And of course they've given him some rubber shoes there, but again I think there's a little bit of detail in here. We can actually see the attempt to sort of do some laces and a little bit of design with these shoes, so I'm very happy with this. I think they've done a really good job. I think the Lugosi Dracula is definitely a cut above what we expect to see in a Mego figure, and he definitely stands out as a really striking and visually interesting toy to have on the shelf. And of course, the Lugosi Dracula is so iconic and so indelible in people's minds when they think of Dracula that, yeah, you can't really fail with him. So yeah, I absolutely, heartily recommend this figure. Next up, we have Frankenstein, or more appropriately, Frankenstein's monster. Now actually, they've done a couple of different variants of this figure, including glow-in-the-dark variants and obviously fully clothed ones. I've gone for the most gory, gruesome version because I like all the extra detailing. And this time they've added some lightning bolts and gone for an illustration of Frankenstein's monster. Meanwhile, on the reverse we have a completely different illustration. But I'm a big fan of illustration, so I always love card art, and I think they've done a really nice job of this. I think it's very displayable and really fun. And just like Dracula, when you take the figure out, you can see there's actually a slab behind the figure there, and we can actually see a bit of blood where he's been experimented on. And I think this is, again, a lovely little touch. Here's the figure out of packaging, and of course this version has the chains that are wrapped around his arms there, which I think are really cool. And yeah, I think this is a nice visually striking figure. It's another one that really jumps out at you when you look at him on the shelf, and I think they've done a really solid job of him. I think the sculpt is very strong. Obviously, this does strongly resemble Boris Karloff. The only thing is that they've definitely played up the goriness of it, the stitching, which I think is fantastic. I like having a little bit of extra colour on there, but they're definitely missing the famous neck bolts, which is strange because it's such an iconic thing. I do really like the detailing on the torso, again having no stitching on there, and I think if you're not really overly fond of this design, you can always get a jacket and put it over and you've got two versions. The only thing that lets this figure down though is the Made in China and the Mego logo on the back there. I think that's a bit distracting and it kind of ruins the aesthetic a little bit. I don't understand why they couldn't have put this on his leg. But I really do like the chains. I think this is very, very cool. I love that these are individual links, so it's not one solid piece, so it does move. And yeah, I think this is a nice little extra feature, and I just think it sets the figure off. I think they've done a nice job of this. There's a decent attempt to do something interesting with the trousers. They definitely tried to rip them up a little bit and make them look a bit ragged. And they've opted to give him those plastic boots, which are fine, they're nothing special, but overall, yeah, pretty decent. And again, there's little tassels there, little ripped edges on the cuffs of the trousers, which is kind of cool. You're pretty much spoiled for choice when it comes to variants of this figure, but I think the base mold is pretty solid on any of them, and this is my personal preference because I do like the, like I said, the gaudy details there, but I don't think you can go far wrong with this figure. I think they've done a solid job, and they've tried with the chains and whatnot to make him as interesting as possible. Okay, time to check out his missus. Here we have the Bride of Frankenstein. Again, this time in terms of the card art, they've done something slightly different. This time we just have a still from the film and a different image on the back of the card. This is really very cool. I quite like this still image that we have on the back here. I think this is very displayable, it looks really cool, and obviously it captures the spirit of the film. And yeah, when you get it out of the box, I think we start to see one of the flaws in the design of this costume. It is very faithful to what we see on screen, but I have to say for me personally, it's probably not the most visually striking monster of all of the Universal Monsters. I think it's a little bit plain, it's a little bit disappointing, and I think in toy form that really comes across loud and clear because it basically does amount to a figure in a big white sheet, and it's a little bit disappointing when it comes to a toy. Now, that said, I do think the head sculpt, the likeness, is pretty strong. I think they've done a really good job of this. And if you look closely, you'll see that on the film, she has these scars running down the side of her neck and under her chin, and they've tried to replicate that in this toy. But sadly, aside from that, there's not an awful lot of detail that they could really have pulled out of this character to kind of make something of in the figure. So what she has is these bandages wrapped around her body with this big white sheet over her. The pleasing touch is that the bandages do go all the way down, so if we lift up the bottom of her dress there, we can see that it goes right the way down to the feet there, which is kind of cool. So I think they've done the best job they possibly could. I don't think of what else they could have really added to make this any more special. I just think for me personally, it's not a design that I'm really into, and I think that makes the toy a little bit disappointing. Overall, this is a pretty nice figure if you're a big fan of the film series, which of course we all are. But as a toy, it was definitely one I was more excited to get in theory than when I actually got it. I was a little bit deflated, a bit disappointed with it because visually it just isn't that striking. But it is nice as part of a set. But for me, I think it's probably the weakest in this line. Okay, so next up we have the Werewolf, also known as the Wolfman, or Werewolf of London. It had a few different iterations in the films, and this is more of a generic Wolfman. It isn't specifically one of the Lon Chaney ones, but obviously when we look at that face, I think we can tell it is. Again, the card art's a little bit different this time. It's definitely not a consistent theme running through these toys, but this time we have a nice illustration there of the Wolfman howling at the moon. It's kind of fun, but it's also a bit cartoony, and like I said, it's not film specific. The reverse of the packaging is a little bit disappointing this time. It's not quite as fancy or illustrative. It's a pair of eyes hunting over a road, which is cool, but it's just, yeah, it doesn't look very displayable. It's not very visually interesting. I should probably point out that they've done a number of versions of the Wolfman, and I think, you know, they've now narrowed it down and done a specific Lon Chaney version, but they did two versions of this figure, one that was flocked and one that was not. One was a hard plastic. Of course, I jumped at the chance to get the flocked version because it's just different and it's cool, and I love having different textures in my toys, and I'm delighted with how this has turned out. Now, in terms of the likeness, here of course is a shot of the Lon Chaney werewolf, and I think we can tell here that clearly there's definitely an illusion here. Those fangs that point up, the nose, the snout there, definitely, this really clearly to me echoes the Lon Chaney Wolfman. I think it's a pretty fantastic job. Once again, I think the tailoring on this figure is pretty much top-notch. We look at all that shredded detail on the shirt there, I think is really cool. I love that we can unbutton it and take it up a little bit, and we can see that the flock goes all the way over the body, the whole body there, and it just looks really cool. I love having that texture. It looks fantastic, and it feels really cool as well. So I think this is a really different kind of figure to have in your Mego collection. Again, we've got some ripped pants there, and of course, the flocked fur is coming through. I love this. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And we can see it once again on the feet there. And what's really cool is that it actually helps to hide some of the joints as well. So it just looks really, really good in my opinion. I'm very, very impressed. I'm very taken with this figure. It'll probably come as no surprise then, but for me, he's one of my favourites in this line. I think he's one of the best. He's just very distinctive, and he just pops out of your collection when you've got him on the shelf. I just think, he's definitely attention grabbing, and he's very fun. Next up, we have The Mummy, and The Mummy, funnily enough, isn't one of my favourites in the film series. It's probably one of the weaker entries in my opinion, and it's not a film I have a lot of love for, but that said, I do absolutely love this figure. For starters, I think the card art is really fun and cool. I think they've done a nice job of the artwork there, and particularly the red glowing eyes coming through the bandages is really nice touch. And of course, we see the same image on the reverse of the packaging, but this time with some hieroglyphics thrown in for good measure. And yeah, this is pretty fun. Once again, they've applied that trick that once you pull the figure out of the packaging, behind it we can see there's an open sarcophagus. It's such a little thing, but I really like this. I really enjoy this feature, and I think it's a really fun idea. And then straight away, as soon as you get this figure out of the packaging, yeah, he's really impressive. I think all those bandages there, just visually, they grab your eyes straight away. I think everything about this figure just rocks, really. They've done such an amazing job of it. I think the head sculpt is really nicely done. I love the detail. We can see the eyes, and of course the teeth coming through the bandages is really nice. And in terms of likeness, I think it's a pretty decent attempt to capture the Mummy. But of course, I don't think this is specific to the film, the Boris Karloff version. I think this is, meant to be a generic Mummy, and I think it works better in that sense. For me, it's all about the textures, and we've got plenty here. I love how they've bandaged this figure all the way up, and I love that there's these loose individual strands that just kind of trail behind him that looks a little bit old, worn, and come to life. I just think it's absolutely fantastic. Another neat little feature is though, they've actually given something a bit extra, which is really kind of cool, because not a lot of these figures in this line actually come with any accessories, so it's nice that he actually comes with a canoptic jar here. It's very bland, there's no paint applications on it at all, and it's a shame, because I think if they just give it a little bit of paint here and there, just a bit of black, maybe a bit of grey or whatever, then it would really bring this prop to life, because they've done a nice job with the sculpt. So overall, yeah, this is another top contender in this line, I think. And to be fair, they're all pretty solid. But yeah, I think they've done a really nice job. I love the bandages. I love that he comes with a canoptic jar. I think the sculpt is really cool on the face. And yeah, I think he's just visually very appealing. Okay, then finally, in my lineup of figures, they did do a few others, the Phantom of the Opera, etc. But for now, sadly, this is where my collection comes to an end. We have the creature from the Black Lagoon. I have to say, this is probably my personal favourite of the Universal Monsters. I'm not hugely enamoured with the film, it's fine, but really it's all about the design of this costume. I just absolutely love it. There's just something about it I just think is really cool. And somehow for pretty much most of my life, no matter what age I was, before I'd even seen the film, I've been collecting figures based on this design. And I just think there's something really, just visually compelling about it. Now, the packaging is fairly bland, to be honest. There is a nice illustration of the creature itself, but other than that, it's a bit underwhelming. But the reverse of the packaging is a different story. I really love this. This is a fantastic image from the film. It's a production still, which is great, and it actually has the logo from the film as well, which is very cool. And here he is out of his packaging. So, moments of truth, does he live up to the expectation and the anticipation? Yes, he does. I think they've done an absolutely brilliant job of bringing this monster to life. I think the colours are brilliant, the costume, the design is pretty much perfect. And the likeness, yeah, I couldn't really fault it. I mean, to be fair, they are just copying a latex mask, I suppose. So it's not like there's too many details there to really to get right. But yeah, he's got all the gills. I love that the effort they've made with the eyes there as well is really nicely done. And you can see there's a nice paint wash running throughout this figure, just to give it a little bit of detail, a little bit of darkness running through it, just to enhance the actual sculpt, and it works fantastically. I'm really pleased that they give him this extra shoulder pad and chest piece just to go over the top of his shoulders there, because this looks really good. It just gives him a little bit of extra detailing, a little bit of extra texture, and yeah, it's very visually striking too. Dotted all over the figure, on the spine, around the waist, on the back of his arms there as well, and on his legs, we see these fins. Now, these aren't a hard plastic, but they are a firm material, which for the most part holds its rigidity and its shape and looks really good. I think the sculpting on the hands is really well done. We can see all that detail under the palm there, and of course the fingernails, and that's absolutely brilliant. And then on the flip side, we can also see some of the detail on the top there as well, and particularly in the webbed fingers. It just looks great. And of course, this is a completely unique set of hands for this figure. And the same thing can be said about the feet, of course. Brilliant detailing, nice paint wash, and of course, unique pieces. So this figure definitely feels unique, distinctive in your collection. So I have to say, this is probably my favourite in the entire collection, right up there with the Lugosi Dracula in my opinion. I think it's just a fantastic figure. I think they've done a wonderful job with the sculpt, the paint apps, the costume, everything about this figure pops, and it feels like a step above what we expect to get from Mego. And so there you have it. There's my overview there of my favourite Universal Monsters in Mego form. I think this is a really nice collection. I think there's a couple of disappointments in there, but again, I don't think that's any blame on Mego's part. I think they've done a really nice job of these, and yeah, I think this is a really strong collection. So if you're only just beginning or you've maybe missed one or two, I think they're definitely worth picking up. And I think, you know, they look really fun together, don't they, when they're all put together like this. I think they've done a really nice job with this collection. I think if you're a fan of these films, then yeah, they're well worth your time picking up. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.